If we turn our backs and spit in his face, is God still gonna bless the USA?
In 1921, a young woman named Margaret Mitchell was told she would never amount to much. A severe ankle injury left her confined to a small Atlanta apartment. She had dropped out of college and felt like a failure. While her friends were building careers and families, she sat at home uncertain about her future. Her fear was one of quiet, suffocating insignificance and wasted potential. Her husband finally said, "If you're so bored, why don't you just write a book?" But she'd never written a book. She had no publishing connections, doubted herself, but began typing page after page, unsure whether anyone would ever read a word. For years, the manuscript sat hidden. She was afraid it wasn't good enough. Then, almost reluctantly, she handed it over to a publisher. That book was Gone with the Wind. It would sell millions of copies and win the Pulitzer Prize. It would later become one of the most iconic films in American history. None of that happens unless a young woman paralyzed by self-doubt decides to fail forward and risk rejection, letting fear have the final word. Courage doesn't always roar on a battlefield. Sometimes it whispers at a kitchen table. Greetings, Patriots. I'm Perry Greene, and welcome to God in America, where faith and freedom confront fear and failure. The principle of overcoming fear played out on a more violent stage on June the 6th, 1944. A young American soldier named Robert James Thompson was paralyzed by fright and couldn't leave his landing craft to step onto the sands of Omaha Beach during D-Day. After he was returned to his ship, the doctors examined him and determined he was unable to continue in combat. Robert overheard their psychological diagnosis and was determined to try again. He did what many thought was impossible. He climbed onto the next available Higgins boat and set out for the beach. This time, when the door dropped, he waded ashore in unexpectedly cold water with his rifle above his head. He landed on the beach, unable to find his unit. He found other opportunities to serve. He carried ammunition and supplies to the troops who had landed ahead of him. He assisted the wounded and dragged them to safety while under intense German fire. He carried messages between units. That is resurgence and redemption. That is the American spirit. Fear may visit us, but it does not have to own us. The Bible reminds us in 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." On that beach, Robert James Thompson proved something profound. The measure of a man is not whether he feels fear, it is whether he surrenders to it. Our founders understood this truth well. George Washington once said, "The time is near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves." Washington knew the stakes of fear. At the Battle of Trenton, his army was cold, exhausted, and afraid, but they crossed the Delaware River anyway. Freedom has never been secured by men who never trembled. It's been secured by men who trembled and moved forward. A young soldier on Omaha Beach freezes, then he rises. A ragtag army on the banks of the Delaware River doubts, then they cross. An imperfect nation wrestles with division and uncertainty, and yet repeatedly we rise, because courage is not born from comfort, it is forged in crisis. Robert James Thompson's story matters because every one of us faces our own Omaha Beach. Maybe not with bullets flying, but with trials that test our character, such as illness, loss, failure, moral pressure, and the cultural storms. You may have frozen, you may have stumbled, but the story is not over. You can rise. What turned Thompson back into the fight? It wasn't his pride or his ego. It was a love for the men beside him. Greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. That kind of love built this nation, stormed the beaches, and still sustains liberty. Because America is more than land on a map. It is an idea that freedom is worth the sacrifice, that faith gives us strength, and that even when we fall short, we can rise again. On D-Day, thousands paid the ultimate price. Robert James Thompson's recovery reminds us that heroism is not perfection. It is God's gift of perseverance. So today, if fear has you pinned down, if failure has whispered that you're finished, remember that young housewife who had a novel idea and wrote a meaningful manuscript. Remember Omaha Beach and a young soldier who froze and then rose. If we're a nation that believes what 2 Timothy teaches, that God gives us power over fear, and as long as we hold fast to the conviction of George Washington that liberty demands courage, then faith and freedom will never die. This is the heartbeat of God in America. We may tremble, but by God's grace, we rise. Thanks for listening. Until next time, let's keep the light of godly courage in the face of fear burning.